I've heard a lot. I ain't talking about now. Well, my cousin was, and they go up and down the road there where I was raised at, across a point, they call it Rocky Point there, and they said every time he go across there, you see somebody following him dressed in white, didn't have on no head or nothing. And he said he tried to find out everywhere in the world, find out what that was, and he never could find it out. It was Haints for them to see back then.
Have you ever seen one yourself?
Well, I seen a caution one time. It was a warning to me. It was a warning what it was. First one I looked over, I put up, and I had that carbide lamp on my head. It burned a great big blaze out there. It wasn't fizzing nothing, trying to go out and nothing. Okay, I looked off down the holler. There was a light that was blue as an indigo. Have you looked at it? I let my light back up and went out again. Lit back up and went out again. Well, I just never tried to light back up no more. I stood there and watched that light that went just bluish, went plumb out of sight, just faded away it did. I let my light back up, burnt as good as it ever did. That was a warning to me to not make any. I didn't take heed to it. Yes, sir, they were Haints, and I ain't sight to be seen him.
I'm just going to say howdy, folks. It's just what I do.
No. You got to get festive with it.
Nope. I'm not the festive one.
Fine, I'll do it. Hey, all you ghosts and goblins, welcome back to your favorite podcast, That Would Be Rad, the podcast that majors in 80s and 90s nostalgia, comic culture, all things paranormal, and minors in retro video games, tabletop RPGs, pre-internet mysteries, and raising our kids to be half as cool as we were back in the 80s. I'm your host, Tyler Bentz, and this is your other spooky host,
Woody Brown.
Hey, man.
Hey, dude. I mean, we say we're in the spooky mood, but we sure are giggling.
Yeah, we're in like a real technical difficulty.
That's just what, the giggling mood, though, is just what happens when you get two best buds together.
That is true, pal. And today, speaking of best buds, these two best buds are currently living in our favorite time of year, and that is the October Spooktacular.
Absolutely, man. It's like ultimately, I think at the end of the day, we really just do this podcast for this time.
100%.
That's it.
Yeah. And it's like anything outside of the month of October is us just trying to
doing this anyway.
Yeah, it's like we're still trying to like keep that fire burning.
Yeah. And at times just kind of being a little bit like, well, I guess we got to tone down the spookiness a little bit this time. Sometimes we get a little, I was the one that watched all of the Friday the 13th movies in summer, you did. Presented a summary. Sometimes we just get a little bogged down.
Yeah.
But it's finally that time of year. I kind of started a little bit early a couple weeks ago. I started watching the scary movies.
Yeah, me too.
Just the second that the temperature kind of like relaxed a little bit, I was like, okay, I know what I'm doing. I'm watching the scary movies today.
Oh, yeah.
But, dude, I'm so excited about, we're finally talking about something that we've kind of, behind the scenes been talking about for many, many years.
Yeah, and that is a particular series of books that me growing up in North Georgia, the foothills of Appalachia, when I was a kid, I remember hearing and seeing these books all over the place. They were constantly featured at my local public library, which I was there all the time as a kid. I was a big reader, loved anything, spooky and weird and anything related remotely to that, cryptozoology, Halloween, ghost stories, all that kind of stuff. And this was a book series that I actually thought was really lame when I was a kid. And I think that was because I grew up in rural, White County, Cleveland, Georgia. Mm-hmm. And, my family they weren't really into all that stuff. They were very blue collar. I know I've said it a million times before, but this is all the stuff that my Aunt Linda and myself were like really into, but everybody else in the family was sort of like, eh. So they had these books called Foxfire, and these books were just sort of a collection of old-timey sort of, I don't know, tricks of the trade, like how to make baskets, how to make cornbread, midwifery. Is that right? Midwifery? I know it's a midwife, but I think it is pronounced midwifery.
I'll be honest with you. I'm not sure. And
well, if that's wrong, I'm not.
But we understand where you're going. Okay, we can move on.
Yeah. But it's just this old-timey kind of collection of ways to do things, or the way that they did things back in the day. And to kind of shed a little bit of light on Foxfire for you folks that may not know, Foxfire was actually a magazine that began in 1966. It was published as a quarterly little magazine by the English students at Rayburn Gap and Nacoochee School, which is no longer around.
Rabin County, Rabin County, Georgia?
Yeah, dude. That's what I'm talking about.
Well, no, I knew they were like relatively local, but I didn't realize. Okay, keep going. This is even more fascinating than I realized.
Yeah, dude. And it was this basically just sort of a class project, if you will, this English class by this guy named Elliot Wigington. And they basically decided to publish this magazine over the course of a semester. Originally, it was just like a kind of a one-time sort of things. And it was a way that all these students in this class would go and they would interview, relatives and like locals in like their area up in sort of the mountains and stuff, on just sort of lifestyle topics, culture, crafts, and skills of sort of the older folks and the previous generation in Southern Appalachia. And so a lot of the stuff I always viewed as like really boring. However, there's an issue, which is Foxfire number 2, which I recently picked up at an antique store, as I'm prone to do. And that's the one you want to get if you're anything like us, because that's the one that talks about ghost stories and some of sort of the, more sort of paranormal aspects of old-timey Appalachian culture. And so today, Woody and I are going to be reading some of our favorite excerpts from the chapter on ghost stories, which is entitled Boogers, Witches, and Haints.
Now, real quick, before we dive in, there's something that I got to kind of set the scene for, because oftentimes you'll hear Tyler and I talk about our interest in, just different cultures of the Americas. Specifically, though, locally, we're super interested and really just kind of fascinated by a lot of these old legends that existed from as far back as the early settlers to early 1800s and 1900s and all these things that were kind of passed down. And it's funny because I think when you're talking about, earlier you said something about these books being sort of like when you were a kid, like, I don't want to read that.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know if it's just like a factor of us getting a little bit older and having more appreciation for things, but the fact that this English teacher and his kids were documenting local traditions is so freaking cool to me.
Yeah.
Another aspect, again, before we dive in, to me that is really, really exciting about this time that we're opening up the October Spooktacular with this is, to me, like folk horror or like backwoods sort of like scary stuff. You're kind of leaning kind of towards that sort of Texas Chainsaw Massacre type environment where something about it just feels much more scary to me because there's like this secluded aspect of these areas that just adds another element of horror to it all that just, man, I can't wait to dive in. So, without further ado, I just had to say that.
No, you're exactly right. I mean, and it kind of like, if I know you, Clay, but if you're a fan of like writers like Manly Maid Wellman and his Silver John series, it's like, it's kind of that thing where it's like you're, this very secluded, you're cut off from like sort of modern society, you're out in sort of the backwoods, and those woods at night can be a very scary place. And what's cool is like, again, this goes back to these kids interviewing, these were old timers back in 1966 that they were interviewing. So what's really cool is like, this is going way back. And so a lot of these sort of traditions of, I've said before, and in the title, Boogers, Wishes, and Haints, Haints is, haunts, hauntings, ghost, whatever. Witches kind of have a different sort of feel as what maybe we would view them as in modern culture. But then boogers, which, is a term that my grandmother used to use. And what's funny is I didn't really know until I was like much older, like fully as an adult, that when she was talking about the woolly boogers, she's basically talking about Bigfoot. Or like wild men or the wild men and stuff. And one of the things too, just before we dive in, that's really interesting that I remember her telling me about is she used to tell me all these stories about her father. And my grandmother's 88 now, so she's almost 90, so she's getting up there. But her dad and her grandfather used to tell these stories that there was like a particular area, a piece of property where it was just accepted that there was a woolly booger that lived up there. And they would say that at night you would hear what sounded like a baby crying, and that and this gets into like Tim Marchenko territory, disembodied voices, but he would say, no, never like be tricked by that because that's just the woolly booger. And it's funny because even in like modern culture, that's something that you're starting to hear more of, or these sort of like sounds like a baby crying or sounds like a woman screaming. So it's. I mean, I don't know if this was the intention of the woolly booger, however, as funny as that sounds, but it does feel like it's like setting a trap.
And it's funny because if you think about that sound in general, I think it can do one of two things. It can either scare you away, so it's like a tactic to kind of keep outsiders, almost like a protective tactic, like a warning sound, or if they're utilizing it as some sort of like hunting technique. I mean, I think it's somewhat interchangeable because, for me, if I'm hearing something crazy like that, I'm not going to investigate in the middle of the night.
Yeah, but I mean, I think if I didn't know any of this stuff and say I was like, I grew up in the city, didn't know anything about this culture, hadn't read anything that we talk about, and I was out in the woods and heard like what sounded like a baby screaming for help.
I disagree.
I would definitely go toward that.
No, if you grew up in the city, we're not going to argue about whether or not I think, well, let's just put it this way. I camped and hiked my buns off whenever I was a kid and a teen and all of that, up and down the Appalachian Trail. If I heard, I've heard like a barred owl, which is a terrifying shriek in the middle of the night.
Foxes
and I wasn't noises. Like, man, I wonder where that thing's at. I was like, I'm just staying in the tent and hoping that, no. Nope. And I didn't know anything about this kind of stuff back then, really.
Yeah. Well, but you and I are a little bit different.
And by that, you mean coward. Let's get in.
To being scared of the dark. Do you want to kick it off or do you want me to?
Well, sure. I'll kick it off.
Okay.
I'm going to kind of read sort of this intro, which immediately reminds me of just a couple weekends ago when my son and I went camping. This is exactly what we did. So, folks, get ready, sit back. I don't know if you're going to be able to relax, but at least enjoy the spookiness. Probably my earliest memories are of the times when the power would go out and we would have to get down the kerosene lamps. My grandmother always used these times to the best advantage by telling ghost stories or booger tales. I don't remember the tales as such, but I can remember the lamp that lighted only her face as she recalled the choicest horrors of her childhood. That the people of these mountains should have a rich supply of Haint tales is not at all surprising. They had conquered the land, but only in a small area around their doors. No matter how friendly the woods seemed in daylight, there were noises and mysterious lights there at night that were hard to ignore if you were out there all alone. This is a story by Mr. Daniel Manis. No, I don't think there's anything like that. Do you? I don't think so. I think that's the imagination. You think on a thing till you think it's real. I used to hear my grandfather tell one about when he was a boy. There's a cemetery right close to where he lived, and he could hear a baby crying every night over at the cemetery. He was scared and didn't know what to think about it, and told one of the neighbors, said, I heard a baby cry over yonder at the cemetery every night. I didn't go about it. Said, I'm afraid to. Are you afraid to go over there? He said, no, I'm not afraid to go over there. Grandpa says, you come over to my house tonight. If that baby cries, if you'll go over there and see what it is, I'll give you $10. So he came over then that night, and waited till 7 o'clock. Said, all right, if you're not afraid to go, now's the time to go. That man just took off and went over there, and there's a big basket sitting on top of the tombstone. And there's a baby in it, little baby boy. He just went and picked up the basket, went on back and took it to him and said, it's a baby. He'd been hearing the baby for several nights, he claimed. He kept that baby and raised it. Jesus, he's about to be like, that baby was me. Jesus, this turned into not a scary story and just like a beautiful tale of adoption. Okay, let me get back in here real quick, just distracted. Okay, that baby was me. Then we started making cornbread. And now let me tell you how we make the cornbread. Okay, it's a baby. He'd been hearing the baby for several nights, he claimed. He kept that baby and raised it, and it went by the name of Billy Toombs, after the tombstone. That was actually the truth. I've heard my grandpa say that he'd seen the boy many a time, Billy Toombs. The Bible preaches that the dead don't know anything at all. After any person dies, why they don't know anything? They don't have any thoughts, don't know a thing in the world. Well, they couldn't come back here. They couldn't come back and cause trouble and bother living because they can't get back. They're dead. They don't know anything. If you don't believe the Bible, you just as well not believe nothing. If I didn't teach that, you might have something to base it on, you see? But since they don't know anything, how could they come back? Because they'd have to be doing a little thinking or something or other before they could get back and trouble anybody or anything. These mediums that say they could talk to the dead and all that, I don't believe that. That's just an evil spirit. Really, I don't believe in them. There's nothing to base it on. There's no foundation. Can't build a house without no foundation. The Bible destroys all the foundation. If something dies, it's gone. Don't know a thing in the world. You can find the stories, but there ain't no foundation for them. That's what I call a myth, just not reality.
Man, I mean, there's so many like little gems in there that are just so profound, but they're said in such a, like sort of simple, primitive kind of way. But I
thought you were going to say the first gem, of course, was my stellar performance of.
Oh no, Daniel. You did great. Actually, I actually meant to preface that is it's going to be hard for us to read this without kind of clicking into sort of Southern accent.
Well, it's just it's fun. So the interesting thing about that is, this is a tale that on the surface doesn't seem that scary. Mm-hmm. But again, imagining yourself in a situation where it's extremely rural. And we're talking about if this is the 1960s and he's talking about his grandpa and a baby from his grandpa's era. Yeah. I mean, let's just say that this guy's what? I don't know, 50 or 60 years old?
Yeah, I mean, usually...
so early 1900s he was born. His grandfather would have been, mid 1800s.
But most of these old-timers in this book that they interviewed, I mean, you can see the picture of Annie Perry on plate 350. I mean, they're like even older. They're in their 80s or 90s.
Yeah. And so they come from a time when to get to somebody's house from your house was quite an endeavor.
Oh, yeah.
And then to hear, and a lot of these little graveyards too, I don't know if folks are familiar with the way it is around here, man. And I think it's a good spot to sort of bring that context because we got listeners all over the world. And so it might be different for them. And honestly, it's different in different parts of the U.S. as well.
Yeah.
There are areas here in the South, Georgia specifically, where there are these like little bitty sort of what we would call like family grave sites.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Sometimes people had enough money to have a nice tombstone that was carved and all this kind of stuff and would say the person's name, something carved into the epitaph.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of times, though, where this would just be a small little farmhouse deep into the woods, man.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking like you can accidentally come across these things when you're hiking and you don't even know it, that are just marked with like some stones kind of in the shape of a cross.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Or you just happen to see like stones that look like they're the distance that like bodies would be.
Right. So I think from the gist that I get from this guy's story is that this baby's crying, and I wanted to set that scene because I think often when we hear cemetery, you're thinking like a big old thing where there's like a road that you can, okay, this is where that person, no. We're talking about backwoods, small family plot where, it would be kind of scary to hear a baby there. So there's a couple things going on here. Did someone leave the baby?
Yeah.
And I think this guy's, the way he presents his story, it reminds me of a situation where, have you ever been around those like kids or people who you can tell they really want something, like they want to be, I don't know how to explain it. Like they want their basketball team to win or something. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But whenever they're talking to you about it, they're like verbally convincing themselves in front of you that it doesn't matter. Right. So they're like, no. I mean, we're really just here to have fun. But you can tell in their mind, in their heart, they want it so bad. This guy, I'm not saying that he doesn't believe what he believes when he starts bringing in the Bible and stuff. But I do feel like it's that same sort of thing that it's a scary moment for him, a scary story. He's just kind of reiterating to himself in a way, confirming like, oh, no. It's nothing. It was a real baby. It was, nothing scary about that because,
it's funny you brought that up because that happens a lot in the book where they'll basically say this thing and they'll say, and I believe it, this person or my daddy would never tell a lie, but I also believe in the Bible. The good Lord says that you shouldn't do,
Right.
So it is interesting how they always, whether it's like for the positive or I guess negative or sort of not believing it, they'll always go back to like the Bible.
Well, and also, I don't know if, I'm sure this is the same for your grandparents that I don't know, but my grandparents and that generation of folks before, like my great-grandmother and even my wife's grandma and stuff, they're very like shy in the sense of like how we would judge people today. Like we live in a society now where everybody's on social media and everything. It's like you tend to know a lot more about people.
We call that modesty.
Yeah. I'm just saying like they didn't really want to talk about their business with somebody outside of the family.
Nope.
And I feel like these people are being interviewed. They're probably just really having to pull these stories out of these folks.
Well, that's why I feel like these Foxfire books are just so invaluable because, it really is, as far as anything I can think of, is the only place that's like, that acts as like a collection or like an aggregate of, these previous old-timey traditions that, we would know nothing about half this stuff, and especially even like reading these sort of ghost stories or encounters and stuff, it is really interesting because like there's certain like themes that I feel, even us like growing up, from the 80s up until now, 2024, like we've seen like certain themes and certain things like kind of go in and out of style regarding like the paranormal and like ghost stories and stuff. And so like there's a lot of this like baby crying. One thing that I did notice about this book is there's so much, and I don't know if we'll get into a ton of them, but there's so much regarding like these churches being like places that are haunted, which I found really interesting because you would think it would be the opposite. They talk about, oh, we were at church, 4 days a week and, we were at camp meeting for 2 weeks straight and all this stuff. But then they would, on the flip side, they'd be like, yeah, we were walking by this church and everybody knew you didn't walk past this church at midnight. and you'd hear growling or a baby crying. Like, and so I found that really, really kind of interesting, like thematically.
Yeah, man. Well, I'm kind of bummed that you gave me like the, sweet adoption story one. We promised it would be spooky.
Oh, it'll get spooky.
And that wasn't really spooky. So jump into a spooky one for me.
All right. Well, actually, these next two I'm going to read together because the first one's really short. But these two I immediately was drawn to because of my own sort of, orb sort of stories, which you can find in previous episodes. But
after these messages, we'll be right back.
At Sierra, discover great deals on top brand workout gear, like high-quality bikes, which might lead to another discovery. Getting back on the saddle isn't always comfortable. Good news is Sierra has massage guns. And chafe wipes, too. Discover top brands at unexpectedly low prices. Sierra, let's get moving.
It's a pretty cool place if you're a Martian.
Or a vampire. You think you really know what's happening around here, don't you?
Is anyone out there?
We're fighters for truth, justice, and the American way.
Hey, this is Woody.
And this is Tyler. And you're listening to That Would Be Rad.
And now back to our show.
This is from Mary Carpenter. There's a place over yonder at Jim Branch. They had been people said they had seen balls of fire big as these old-timey washpots roll the road there. I forgot who it was that told me that. They was a-coming there one night and said there was a big ball of fire. And they said they hit Frank Kelly's field and cut out across the field and wouldn't pass it. Then Hoyt Thomas said, I had friends treat a possum one night and said they seen a ball of fire that gave enough light till they seen how to get that possum out of that tree. And then one night last winter, we seen a light, but it looked like a weather satellite put up in fall that was burning up. It just looked like an extra moon. It had kind of a purple-like glow around it. Didn't last but a few minutes till it was gone. Then it trailed off in a cloud of smoke. And one night it just looked like the world was afire back in there. Like a big forest fire, and it come on around, and at 12 o'clock it went right square up in the middle of the sky and made a question mark, just as pretty as a question mark as you ever looked at. So, man, I love that.
Me too, dude, because basically, yeah, are you an interdimensional? Basically, like, I'm just going to kind of do what, what's his name's dad did right out of the gate last week, or the week before last, in our last episode, and say, like, dude, that sounds like a dadgum.
Yeah.
A UFO's landing in the woods.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because, so that last one, the reason I really like that is I remember there was a story, and I got to see if I can get my grandmother to remember it. She's kind of got dementia, but on the bright side, usually like they can remember things from like 60, 70 years ago. Mm-hmm. It's just sort of
it's like a pocket. Yeah.
Yeah. But I remember when I was little, she told a story about something that was like really similar. Like her dad or her grandpa remembers seeing like this hill that looked like it just was like all up in flames. They said like the whole, like it was, 9 or 10 in the evening, and it just looked like it was just completely covered in fire. And I guess some of the guys in the area or whatever, they got on their horses, they flew up there, and nothing, no burn marks, nothing. And then the next day they went up there and there was nothing there. And so it is like really interesting to hear these like sort of light anomalies, especially, and it kind of gives me comfort because, where I had my orb thing, it was right up in this exact same area. I mean, a lot of these people that they're interviewing are from, Cleveland, Helen, Rayburn County, Lumpkin, like they're all in that sort of North Georgia area. And so it's interesting to me to hear these stories that are like so similar to mine. And it's almost like, well, is this more of a, I don't know, is this something that's like a symptom of the location that it's in,
Mm-hmm.
I love it.
Super cool.
Yeah, dude. So actually, I'm going to jump in on this next story about Ethel Corn because it kind of carries on that theme of these lights. They call them balls of fire jack-o'-lanterns. It's kind of a round-looking thing. And it'll come and they'll play up. They'll go down low to the ground and high up. And their seed always over here on what they call the Cheney Hill. And some said it was from mineral. There's a vein of minerals goes through there, and they'd rise and they'd go up, and they're pretty good-sized lights. And they're playing all over the bottoms down below there. And sometimes they'll go way up and then back down. I'd been out a plowing, and I was wanting to get the bottom plowed out. And I plowed. It was a dusky dark when I got in. And when I went to put up the horse and got the corn and went to feed her, and right at the back of the stable, there was just a big light rose down right at the back of the stables in the swamp. And it kept going higher and higher. I was young, I wasn't plumb grown, and I was awful cowardly. And I throwed the corn through the crack in the stable, and I didn't put it in the trough. And I run, and I never knowed what it was. I didn't take time to see how high it went. I run. And Andy Burrell's going up the branch home one night. It is in the wintertime, and right cold, and there's a wind a-blowing right hard. And it got to blowing and flopping his tie back over his shoulder. And he never thought of it being his tie. And he run about a quarter of a mile up the mountain till he just completely give out. And when he did, he found out it was his tie that is doing the flopping and making the rackets. He is scared, and he took a hard race from it. So I think I love her talking about like seeing the lights, but that's funny. She sort of adds this story. It's almost like kind of like what you're talking about, where it's like a person sort of divulging this thing, but it's almost like she felt ashamed of her telling this like supernatural story. So she had to like add levity by like telling a story about a guy who was like scared of his own tie.
His tie.
Yeah.
Right. Which in no world would be confused with a ball of light.
Yeah, exactly.
But, same thing. Yeah, she just wants to be like, no, I'm not crazy because also my friend got freaked out by his tie.
Yeah, yeah. But those like, they called them jack-o'-lanterns and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I just think that's so cool. It's got to be the same thing as the orbs that I saw. it feels...
Well, it's in the same area.
Yes, right in the same area. I like that she mentioned that, how like some of the old folks were saying that it was like from like a mineral.
Mm. Oh yeah, because you know what that reminded me of?
What?
It reminded me a little bit of your grandma talking about, you told me a long time ago, your grandma talked about some kind of minerals that were kind of close to y'all's old house. Do you know what I'm talking about? And then that's where like the woolly boogers would be.
You mean, I think it was like quartz.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, yeah. Because we, like, up on the hill, like where my old house was, it's just like tons of quartz down below it, which was interesting because when we had Joshua Cutchin on and we kind of, got into that, I can't remember if we recorded that or if it was just us talking, but he immediately was like, was there quartz in the area?
Right.
And so it's interesting that even the old timers had a thought that like, well, maybe this is somehow like tied in with like some sort of mineral deposit or vein,
So bizarre. And I tell you what, I really you're reading these with such ease.
Oh boy.
Like I almost want to like utilize anything from now on that we get that you're supposed to read to have somebody translate into this stuff because I'm having a tough time reading this stuff.
Yeah.
And you do it with such ease. But typically it's like reverse, right? So if it's written actually well,
yeah,
I have no problem.
Yeah, exactly.
This time it's written crazy. It's like I'm looking at another language.
Well,
sometimes.
It's funny because when I got this book, my wife saw it laying on the counter. She was like, what is this? And I was like, oh, it kind of explained, it's these books, from this school kind of close to where I live and or grew up. And then, I started to read it. And the following day, I was like telling her, I was like, man, this is such a nostalgic sort of experience for me reading this book because like, and it does come supernatural. Well, not supernatural, but it's very natural to me because it takes me right back to these old timers when I was growing up. Like I've said, I was always kind of like the artsy, weird kid, but I was surrounded by like, farmers and, blue collar workers, like, and they all spoke exactly like this. So you know, when it's saying like it and it's saying like hit, I know exactly what it's talking about. And like when it's like I was up there, like that's my grandpa that's exactly how he talked.
Yeah, it's interesting too because like I forget because I've been in Georgia for so long now, you know, high school, college, and then now that I'm used to, you know, understanding Southern dialects and stuff like that. But when it's written like this, I'm reminded quickly, like I didn't grow up in the Appalachia area in the region.
Yeah.
And so some of these regional things, I'm unfamiliar and I don't understand. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But you do. And so that's why I think you should read the rest. Thank you.
Okay, I can do that. All right, well, this next one is from Minyard Connor. This boy that lived way back in the woods had to hunt his cows every evening. There was a big tree beside the road. He'd drive his cows in there, and there'd be something hanging down from the limb up there in the tree. Couldn't tell what it was. He said it would just be hanging there, just nearly dusk. And he had some more boyfriends that lived pretty close. He told these other boys about it. They didn't believe him. And he told them a certain time of the evening it'd be hanging there. Said it wouldn't be hanging there when the sun wasn't shining or anything. It would be right late of evening. He told them to come a certain time. Well, that night the boys was to come. He went up there. He kept watching that limb to see if anything was hanging there. He'd bet some money and he'd lose some money if they wasn't. Well, they wasn't. So he just decided he'd get out and climb the tree and hang down himself. About that time here they come around the curve, you know. He is a hanging down yonder. He'd slipped down on the limb and he is a hanging down there. The boys come up and looked around, said, well, he told the truth, but he said there's just one. There's two of them. And that boy kept turning his head around, you know. He kept turning his head around. He turned around and seen that and hanging right beside him. He just turned loose and here he went. And when he hit the ground, the boys broke and run. Well, he jumped up and took after him. He said, wait there, boys, I'm one of you. One said to the other. They was running right together. Said, what did he say? He said, wait there, boys, I'm going to have one of you. That's the way them ghost stories get started.
Man.
I love that story so much.
That's incredible. I mean, that has like elements of just classic scary stories.
Yeah.
When, you know, things go the way you think they are. And then at the very end, there's like a little twist. You know, like my son, when we went camping, wanted me to tell a ghost story. The one that I could just easily remember quickly was like the classic, the classic like hook on the car.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
It's told a million different ways, but ultimately it's sort of like a guy and a girl go on a date and they end up in this like, you know, place where they've parked their car.
Necking.
They're just necking. Yeah. The funniest term ever.
So weird.
And then on the radio, they're listening to music. The radio broadcast is interrupted. There's a killer on the loose. They just escaped. Yeah. And the guy's like, don't worry about it. We're all right up here. He's not going to come all the way up here. They hear a noise. She's uncomfortable. He's a gentleman. He drives her home. Yeah. As he's coming around the car to let her out, because also, gentleman, he notices this hook that's been attached to her door handle. You know, so it's like there's that element to this where it's like this guy keeps on seeing something hanging from the tree, this mysterious object, which is also creepy. It's not there when the sun comes up.
Yeah, right.
And then he's like telling his friends, they're like, oh, man, shut up. Yeah, we don't believe you, man. And he's like, no, I'm telling you, dude, you gotta. And so he's like, you know what? I'm just going to hang over there and scare him anyway.
Yeah.
And he does that. And then they see not one hanging, but two. And then.
Genius.
Oh, dude, it's so good.
I mean, I do think it's funny the way that she or he, I don't know if Minyard is a boy or girl's name, but I do like how they add levity at the end by saying, like, you know, when the boy, he gets scared up there because he sees that there is something else up there with him hanging, which is what he had talked about the whole time. He lets go, he falls, and then the boys are like running away, and he yells, wait, boys, I'm one of you. But then the boys misinterpret it and say, I'm going to have one of you.
Right.
But that still doesn't do anything. That doesn't take away from the fact that like there were two things in the tree.
Yeah.
Which is kind of crazy.
And also, maybe that second thing was some kind of crazy doppelganger that mimicked his voice and did say, I'm going to have one of you.
Oh, wow.
You know what I mean?
I like that. I like that.
Mm-hmm.
We will return after these messages.
America's future can be determined by our dreams and our visions.
It was very intense, bright light.
For over 200 years, there have been reports of giant man-like creatures.
From another dimension, another world, I don't know.
The most intriguing mystery on the North American continent.
This is Joshua Cutchin, and you're at my home for weirdness. That would be rad.
There were, however, a surprising number of contacts who had seen or whose relatives or close friends had seen phenomenon that was inexplicable to them except in supernatural terms. Most believe unshakably that Haints, Boogers, and evil spirits walk the land. And after hearing their stories, one does wonder. And so this one is from Aunt Nora Garland. There was about 13 couples of us, and we took a notion to walk out plumb to the mountain city, Blue Heights Church, to a box supper. Well, we all were coming, and there was about 13 couples, I guess, and we started back up the mountain, and in the dead of winter, awful cold, but we were young and didn't care much, and we were all coupled up together, and me and my husband, of course, we weren't married then, but there was a little girl there, and there was a family that lived about 1.5 miles from the church back up the mountain on that old road, and they was pretty well-to-do people, and I thought strange about them letting that child go, them leaving that child at the church. So we started from the church, and this little child, it looked to be about 4-year-old, and it was barefooted, and it had on a white dress and a little band in it, like they used to make them, and it had blonde-colored hair and curls plumb down to its shoulders. It walked right at my heels every step up that mountain, and I just thought every one of the rest of them seen it, and I just thought these well-to-do people had just left this child in the church, just went off and left it to sleep there. It kept right at my heels. It didn't walk at the side of my husband. It walked right at my heels all the way up that mountain to a branch. And just before we got to the branch, while that child fell down and spread out its arms that way and was just as gone as ever be. I said, Lord have mercy. I said to my boyfriend, the instant I said that, there wasn't a thing there, a bit more than nothing in this world. That's the reason I believe in ghosts. I wouldn't have found out such a thing as that if I hadn't seen it with my own 2 eyes. But of course, I wasn't a bit afraid, because they is about 13 couples along in front, but that little one had walked right at my heels every step up that mountain till we got to the branch. And my mother always said that a ghost wouldn't cross water. Her and my father used to live right on up above there in a house, and she said every morning there was a naked baby sitting on the chimney. She's told us that so many times, but I didn't see that. I'm just telling you what she had seen. It might have been the same thing, but this child was dressed in white. But I wouldn't have thought of a ghost and hadn't thought of one if I hadn't seen it with my own 2 eyes.
Man.
I love that.
What's interesting about Haints and ghosts and boogermen and boo hags and boo daddies, there's all kinds of names here in the South that talk about different things that are sometimes easily mixed up in terms of how to identify which is which and that kind of thing. Which is which.
No pun intended.
But part of it, some of it, I should say, there's kind of like different thoughts into where the word haint, for example, comes from. Some, especially in the Carolina coast area, it can be kind of traced back to the Gullah Geechee people, descendants of African slaves in the Carolina Low Country and Barrier Islands. Like even here in Georgia, Sapelo Island is one of them. And I got to meet some actually original Gullah people. They're, sweetest. And oh my gosh, the food was incredible. But Haints, according to their belief system, are these malicious ghosts often seeking to steal or harm naughty children. Again, this goes back to what we talk about on the show a good bit about almost like these cautionary tale things that are, somewhat convenient sometimes. But the reason I bring all this stuff up is if you ever visit the South and you see there's all kinds of things that you might see, and not even necessarily in the South, but just in the traditional sort of official Appalachian region, okay, which goes all the way up into like southern Pennsylvania and all that. If you're, interested in the Appalachian Trail itself, it starts in Georgia, ends in Maine, but what is really known as the Appalachian region does include places like Pennsylvania, where there's a lot of Pennsylvania Dutch culture.
Yeah.
There's all these cultures that are bringing their culture way back in the day from Europe or Africa and all this. And then there's this sort of melting pot of situations where, believe it or not, hey, oh my gosh, we have a creature like that in our beliefs. Hey, Native American tribe, we also have a creature like that in our beliefs.
Yeah.
There's all this stuff that's lasted over the test of time. Well, now fast forward to 2024, and you might just be driving through the square in Gainesville, Georgia, okay? And you might see a tree with a bunch of blue bottles on it. And you might think, oh, cool art display and art installation.
Yeah.
Well, the funny thing is there's some tradition behind that, and it is directly tied to what we're talking about today. First off, it's important to note that the color blue is a color specifically for protection against ghosts, but specifically Haints and all that.
It's literally called Haint blue.
Haint blue, yeah. And it's used to ward off evil spirits and witches. And there are people in the Gullah community that we've talked about, these kind of individuals as well, who are kind of like the dedicated, not even shaman, but like the person that's, I guess their job is to ward off these evil spirits, almost like a holy man, really.
Yeah.
And so you'll often see, especially like, I haven't really seen any up here, but you drive through like the low country of South Carolina and you look at some of these old historic homes, because, there's places where General Sherman didn't get to.
Yeah, exactly.
And you'll see this hue of blue paint on the ceilings of these big, covered porches, maybe even the window shutters, the window sills, doors, painted this Haint blue.
Yeah.
And I mean, honestly, it's so common in the South that Sherman-Williams actually mentions it on their website with the following explanation. Many Southerners suggest that blue porch ceilings originated out of the fear of Haints. Southerners, especially in the area of South Carolina, have a name for the ceiling paint used on porches. The soft blue-green is referred to as Haint blue.
Yeah, it's almost like what is it, robin's egg blue kind of, sort of a like tealish baby blue kind of thing.
And it's cool because according to their beliefs, Haints wouldn't be able to cross over water and stuff or go through water. And so they're kind of like tricking the spirit into thinking, oh, that's just water, we'll leave that alone.
Which I never knew that was the reason. I just assumed it was some sort of, some practice, kind of like the hex signs and the
well, and we talk about these scary things happening, and one of my favorite things to talk about is sort of like how to get rid of these things, and we'll get to that after we dive into some more of these stories.
Yeah, and one of the things too that when I was sort of researching this and I was looking in sort of the background of like Appalachia and stuff, and the crazy thing is, I think, especially for our listeners all across the globe, we look at America as like, oh, it's a young country, and it is relatively, compared to these, huge civilizations all over the world that have been around and they've had societies, and long before, 1776 or I guess technically 1492, which take that with a grain of salt. But the mountain range, the Appalachian mountain range this is a crazy fact to me, is said to be, they presume that it is 480 million years old. That's older than Saturn's rings.
I mean, just insane, dude. And I remember when, a long time ago, if you come to America, if you're not from the States, or even if you're from the West Coast and you've never been out east, you look at the Appalachian Mountains, the Blue Ridge Mountains, and they are pretty, but in comparison to like, in terms of size, look at the Rockies and all these things. Or if you're from Europe and you're talking about, the Alps and stuff.
Yeah, right.
You're just like, oh, cool hills, bro.
Well, even
but here's the thing.
Even compared to like Montana and Wyoming.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And what's funny is like, I never realized until I think for some episode we talked about this, I think, or you and I talked about it, whatever. I never really put two and two together in the fact that these mountains are just some of the oldest in the world and they've just been worn down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what's cool too is like, I mean, this is one of my favorite things, is that the Appalachian mountain range, it's the same range if you kind of follow it, that like continues on into like the UK into like across like Ireland and Scotland. And so there is this sort of belief that like, oh, a lot of these, you know, obviously sort of the Neil Gaiman American Gods philosophy, where it's like these settlers are like bringing over their belief systems and their myths and legends and stuff. You know, so your Irish and your Scottish immigrants are bringing over beliefs of, you know, fairies and brownies and stuff. But there's also the belief that like, oh, well, maybe there's a connection even more so with like the actual mountain range of these things, like kind of existing in these two areas, because it's just sort of the continuation of the mountain. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Which is kind of fascinating. Man, if you think about it.
Super cool.
Yeah. This next one is from Jim Edmonds. Jim said, my mother would tell them witch tales. My mother said that her grandfather moved from South Carolina to Towns County. He drunk a lot and weren't scared of nothing. They were looking for a place to camp, and they asked this feller, he said, go to the second branch. Don't stop at the first. Can't stay there. It's haunted. He said he was going to stay there. Weren't a bit scared. They fixed their camp, got their supper, and went to bed. But he was up. He was a-feeling good, heard someone coming like a wagon. Looked down and saw it a-coming, and just like a big white sheet over the wagon, just a-rattling. The old man just hollered at it, but it didn't go very far before he heard it coming back. So he hollered at it again. He got to hollering at it and cussing it, and even got his knife out to cut at it. But you couldn't hit him. That thing faded up and down the road all night. Somebody had been killed, that's the reason for it. And old Billy Jesse claimed he was a witch. Old Granddaddy couldn't shoot a thing. Somebody put a spell on his gun. He went over to Billy Jesse to take the spell off. He lived in what they call Bitter Mountain Cove. Told him he wanted him to take the spell off him. Somebody had witched his gun. So Billy loaded that gun and went to every corner of the house and shot, saying, hurrah for the devil. Run to every corner and shot. Never did load it but once, hollering, hurrah for the devil. Billy then said, now the next thing you will see will be a great covey of quail. Now you don't shoot at nothing. Then the next thing you will see will be a big buck. You can kill him. Just shoot nothing else. Granddaddy done just like he told him. And here come a big drove of birds. He just held still. He went on, and there was a big old buck, shot and killed him. The spell was off his gun. There used to be more ghosts than there are now. Isn't that awesome?
Man.
So cool, man.
So weird, man. Like,
yeah.
It's so cool that all these folks have had these like experiences. And I just love the fact that this English teacher and those kids had the wherewithal to kind of document it all.
Yeah. I mean, it really is fascinating. And I mean, I think there's 12 like proper Foxfire books, but they, you know, originally I think they were put out in like almost like pamphlets, like magazine kind of thing. But I mean, I have one of the original books, and it's just like a brown cover that's the exact same as the back cover. It's like just two covers.
Yeah, I've seen them sold in outdoor stores before.
Yeah.
Like reprinting basically in that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But wow, it's really neat.
Yeah. I love the idea too that like it was just common that like somebody, you know, this man was a witch, and he'd witched his gun to not shoot anything. But, you know, he was just unable to shoot anything. And so kind of like what you were talking about, these, I mean, not really like medicine men or like faith healers, but they were just, I don't know, I guess they were like, sometimes they would be called like the cunning folk, or the, you know, I mean, kind of like good witches in a way, I guess, if you would say. Or even like the powwow doctors, you know, going back to the Pennsylvania Dutch stuff. So this next one is from Lawton Brooks. Bob Meeks was his name, and he was working somewhere in Tennessee over there. He come through by Benton while they didn't have a road then, and he had to come across that mountain. Now, I don't know whether it was Frog Mountain, whether that was the name or not, but anyway, there was 22 mile there, and there wasn't no houses on it, and steep and twisty, my Lord. And it was late in the night. His wife had called him, and some of his kids got sick, and he had to come in, and he is a-coming along up that mountain. And he said he come around a curve, and he seen this thing. Said it is the biggest man he ever saw. The man stepped out of a water ditch by the side of the road, and said he just leaned over a little. And as he came by, he just stepped on the running board, reached down, opened the door, got in, sat down, and looked him over. It was an old Model T, and the way it was going, it didn't make much more time than a man walking. And he said he looked at that thing's hands, and that's what he couldn't figure out. Says its fingers, one of them was as long as two of his'ns. If they was put together and as big again and round. He said he had awful big arms, and on top of his hands was just as hairy, plumb on down toward his fingers. His fingers was the longest he'd seen on anybody, must have been 10 inches long. He said he spoke to him and he never did speak back. He said he didn't know whether he was going to do anything to him or not. He said he knowed he was big enough. There wasn't nothing he could have done about it. There wasn't no need of getting scared because that man could have reached plumb around him, one-handed. Big, tall man, all hairy. Said he had a beard way down and face hairy, and said he was a kind of nasty-looking old man. Said he looked as old as the hills. Said he never got a sound out of him. He could hear him getting his breath, and he said he rode at least 3 miles with him. And he wondered if this thing was going plumb to Ducktown with him. And he was going around another curve and said that thing, man, whatever it was, he just stepped out. And said he looked back, and it is just standing there in the road. Said he was the ungodliest man he ever did see all the days of his life. He said people might not believe him, and he said it is the truth. Now I believe it because I don't believe Bob would tell a lie. He was a man never got excited about nothing. And after that man got out, Bob said he just kept driving on. Dude.
Man alive.
Amazing story. Because, other than like the woolly boogers or the boogers or whatever, like you got to understand, this would have been like long before the Patterson-Gimlin film footage. The terminology of like Bigfoot or Sasquatch, that wasn't really like a thing.
Yeah.
So it was just like these wild men or these, woolly boogers. They were just, I don't know, I think in a way too, it was a little bit of a catch-all sort of term,
Yeah.
But I love that he just like this little Model T like car just, he just steps out of like the ditch on the side of the road on this mountain and just gets in the car with him.
I mean, it implies a couple of things, dude. One, that these sort of occurrences were so, or I guess less infrequent than we think.
Right.
In other words, so much was kind of going on. If they could just lump it all together and say, well, it's probably just one of them old woolly boogers. Yeah. That to me says that stuff was going on. At least one was seen at some point, and everybody just attributes whatever it is, whatever phenomenon is happening to this kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating. And also, I wonder if one of the things that I've kind of picked up on in like reading a lot of these stories is I wonder if, because a lot of the stories they're telling because they heard it from their parents or their grandparents. And so I wonder if like way back then it was more commonplace, but as like sort of modernity crept in, now you're in the 60s. Now you have, it's probably black and white television, but now you have television, you have power. I wonder if, it's that like thing where it's like, oh, we don't talk about that silly stuff. You know what I mean?
Oh, kind of. But no. Yes, I know what you mean, and I kind of agree is what I should say.
Yeah.
I also think there's something else going on here. We talk a lot about, or at least I think everyone in general will talk a lot about the fact that, well, what is that funny like Bigfoot T-shirt that everybody has? It's like the hide and seek champion of the world or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Because it's such an elusive sort of thing.
Yeah.
Oftentimes skeptics will say, and rightfully so, hey, we haven't even seen why haven't we seen a skeleton? We see all these footprints. Where's the dead bodies, right?
Right.
And then that gets into our buddy Joshua Cutchin's and Timothy Renner's book, Where the Footprints End. And that's a fascinating duo of books that is just incredible. But to me, there's something else that happened with modernization of the world, and that is there's far less sort of green space for a lot of these animals to live. In the same way that I've never seen Bigfoot with my own 2 eyes.
Yeah.
I've also never seen a mountain lion. I've also only seen a black bear in North Georgia once on the Appalachian Trail. They're not going to be really close to, civilization.
Yeah, yeah.
Then there's the aspect that we talk about with regard to old beliefs and old belief systems and old gods with a, lowercase g, that once people stop talking about it, once people stop thinking about it and giving it power and all of that, the power is sort of taken away from them in a sense, and they're kind of forgotten and they just kind of disappear.
Well, especially when he said he had a beard way down, a hairy face, and said he was a kind of nasty looking old man, said he looked as old as the hills. Like, it does kind of bring to mind that elemental kind of, almost like the Bell Witch sort of thing too, where you feel like there's just such a, I mean, especially now, what we said about like the Appalachian, like sort of mountain range, or like the Blue Ridge Mountains, it's like, 480 million years old. So it's like the idea that like that land has like sort of its own sort of,
it's seen a lot,
spirit or whatever too, like elemental kind of thing.
Well, it also makes me think of, like, if I was going to be completely skeptical and just think, well, this guy just saw some crazed-eyed lunatic old guy in the woods, I would think of, who's that? What was that famous moonshiner, man? Popcorn. I think his name was Popcorn something, right?
I know who you're talking about.
It's something like that. But, just imagine some skinny old dude walking out of the woods, just hairy as, big old beard and just unkempt and stuff. And it's just like, maybe. But that only really kind of makes sense for one of these events. And I don't know, man. I don't know. It doesn't really explain it all,
Yeah. I mean, especially saying that, like, he had hair all the way, his fingers had hair down them, and his fingers were at least 10 inches long.
My hands look like a gorilla's. You know what I mean? That's, So they had an Italian neighbor, and then they just thought he was a wild man. They started calling him a booger.
We will return after these messages.
There's something out there waiting for us. And it ain't no man.
Hey, this is Bryce Johnson from the Bigfoot Collectors Club, and you're listening to Tyler and Woody on That Would Be Rad, because that is rad.
So this next one is from Miss Mary Carpenter. She says, I've heard Mama tell about the one my daddy saw one time. Said that there was a preacher and there was forks of a road somewhere near a church, I believe it was. And he said that it was about every evening, about sundown, that you could go up there and there was a woman, that she was so high up in the air that she looked like she was on a quilting frame, just high up. And said she had a long black dress and she was walking along and it rustled like leaves rattling, as she walked. Now, is that the kind of haint tale you want? And there at my brother's right across the creek, you've been over there on Kelly's Creek up there where Jim Taylor lives. There's a Mason woman lives over there. Said she had seen a little baby out there that was flying, had wings. And she said it came up out of her garden more than once, and she'd be out there on the back porch up in the evening doing her night work. And she said it would rise up with wings like a little angel, a baby, which, by the way, I think that's amazing. Like, that's one of my favorites, because it is that idea that, like, I do feel like some of these things that these people are talking about, which, again, it goes back to why this is such an invaluable sort of resource, is I truly believe that a lot of the things that these people are saying, like, yes, your modern man can debunk it all and say, oh, well, they were just dumb, old people that were uneducated, lived up in the hills. I 100% disagree. I think in a lot of the ways, these people are so much more advanced than we are, in different ways. And
dude, they're tied to their environment.
Yeah, exactly.
More than most of us are or could be, because they had nothing else, dude. They're not messing around on their phone playing like how to build the best pizza game or whatever it is. And they are spending their time outside, digging their hands in the dirt, and really just kind of like experiencing all of that. You know, none of these stories that you've read so far, and I'll be the first to tell you, like, there are some people that are just like, you know, that guy.
Yeah.
None of these have sounded like that to me, you know, unless you're judging it based on the accent or how they're speaking.
Yeah, exactly.
Which that's unfair and you know, stupid. So none of them have sounded extremely outlandish. I mean, that's what I love the most, I think, probably about this is that some crazy stuff happened to these folks. And either they kind of like try to calm it down a little bit and just be like, well, and also my friend got scared of his tie.
Yeah, right.
But no, I really like that. And I mean, dude, there's just something about that area that feels, and I think the Cherokee felt this way too. It's just like this area feels like we're so close to this sort of magical area. You know what I mean?
Like, is it like a ley line thing, or like
is it a ley line thing? Is it just like, is this section of the world so old, these mountains so old and everything, that there's just so much concentration of things that, you know, I don't know, like energy, the stone tape stuff. I mean, for new listeners that have just joined us for the first time on this episode, they are getting quite a bucket full of what the heck, you know?
Yeah, right.
But it's just fun stuff that we like to talk about here at That Would Be Rad, because you're talking about an area, like you said, over 400 million years old.
Yeah.
I mean, just think about the number of different things that this area has been around for. And just thinking about it in terms of energy and stuff.
Yeah. It's like what of, you know, just the amount of, you know, strictly looking at it as like energy, like you just said, like just the amount of, you know, emotion.
Dude, wars, conflicts, love, death, birth, life, everything in this spot for that much time. I don't know. It's just fascinating, dude.
Yeah. I also think, just from the little piece that I just read, there is something interesting, and I do wonder if this is like a true sort of fairy thing. So one of the things, which for you longtime listeners, you know that we always kind of preface the fae stuff or the fairy stuff as like, we view this in the modern age like through the lens of like Disney, right? But none of these people, I mean, there are accounts of like some brownies that are just these like tiny little people, or like, you know, very like minuscule, like in size, but it's not always like that. Like they don't all come across as like Tinkerbell. And so I do think it's interesting, you know, I read one, you know, a few pages back that was talking about how the mom would see a naked baby just sitting on top of a chimney every morning. And then this one is talking about how this lady, when she was out in her garden, would see this little like baby with wings coming up out of the ground.
It's like these little cherubs or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I thought of, yeah. And so it's like, what is that, you know? So she continues on and says, and I know she's seen something one time, for because her husband, Frank's daddy, lived over on Germany, and he was sick, bad sick. And so Frank, he'd went to see his daddy. They were looking for him to die. And she had a hog pen out in the woods there, out toward our house. And she began to scream. And Mama hollered to me to run over there for something the matter. She may be snake bit. Well, I went a-running just as hard as I could. And Dad, he went a-running over there. And, you know, she had fainted before the time we even got over there. By the time we brought her to, she said there was a man there at her hog pen with a white shirt on and no head. Blood was all over his white shirt. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
There's actually a few that have to do with this like headless motif, which I find really interesting.
Oh, yeah, especially since it kind of coincides with one of our favorite Halloween traditions of all time, which is Ichabod Crane.
Exactly. This one is really interesting to me because this, again, takes me sort of back to another sort of scenario or encounter that I had where I saw like some sort of white figure that looked like it was moving on train tracks. Probably one of the probably out of all the things that I've seen, and quite honestly, I guess I have been fortunate enough to see a lot of sort of paranormal weird stuff, compared to most people. But this one is one of the more fascinating ones to me, because there's so little that I've found out about it. Like there's no. I remember looking into it, and I did see there are certain things where they talk about it in what's called like granny magic, or it's kind of this stuff that we're talking about. It's like this sort of old timey, like wise women tales where they would talk about this character that they would see in the woods. It looked like it was like covered in like a white sheet, and it looked like it was just sort of moving on tracks or something. And they would call it like a white shadow. But overall, like I found like maybe a handful of things, kind of talking about the same thing. But so this one's really interesting. It says, and Grandpa said one time, and Uncle Dave was going home from a dance. And as they come around there where a pond was, why they heard something saying, oh Lordy, taking on pitiful. Grandpa said he was scared and said he was little. And he grabbed Uncle Dave by the coat and said, Dave, don't you run. He said, I ain't going to. I'm going to stay here. It's rising, whatever it is. And he said, something come up out of the water with the moon a-shining. Said you could see it like a white sheet. Said it had 4 corners, and it just kept going up and up and up. And it was just taking on the pitifulest. Said it was saying, oh Lordy. Grandpa said that his mother said that what caused that, there was a miller there, and he had killed his wife and put her in there. But that's been many, many years ago. I don't know. It could have been. Grandpa, I believe, told the truth. Because I never did know him to tell it wrong. I believe he heard it. I believe there's things for certain people to see. So that's really interesting. It's just like a sheet spread out, rising out of the water and just floating up into the air.
And alive.
It's so bizarre, like these little...
And like I said, I think on the surface though, dude, it's like taking these stories out of sort of geographical context. Each one individually doesn't really, strike me or maybe even the listener as like something scary.
Yeah.
But when you place it right in the middle of the time period when it was happening, the level of rural that I don't know if people are grasping yet, despite the fact that we've said the word rural maybe 50 times today.
And we say it very weird sounding.
Yeah, well, it's just sort of like that 30 Rock episode where she's like, what's the name of your movie? And she's like, The Rural Juror. And it's like, the Rural Juror?
Yeah.
It's just 2 words combined that are just tough to... Okay, anyway, my point is, like, they are, to me, much more terrifying because of just the solitude, man, that goes with these stories. Just being that person that, I don't know if folks have experienced the level of solitude that you get in a good way when you go hiking and camping and you're just out there in nature.
Oh, yeah.
Those quiet moments in the morning, there's just nothing more quieter. And it's just like you can have these amazing, almost spiritual experiences really whenever you're just out there in nature, waking up with the woods and having this view of this water and stuff, and even at night and stuff. But it really is, there's this element of just absolute scary that accompanies the woods at night, man.
I think also one of the things that is so interesting, specifically about these stories, is just the level of high strangeness that's attached to them. Like the idea that they didn't really have, I'm sure they did to some extent, but they didn't have like as much of a cultural lens or like a sort of zeitgeist that they were viewing things through. Because all these people, like what Woody just said, they are so secluded, they are so isolated that even their neighbor could be a couple miles down the road or down the mountain. And so they're sort of living within their family unit. And then that's, for the most part, that's it. The men may have gone out and like worked, every few days, logging or whatever. But a lot of these people were so isolated from one another that it's interesting when you hear, obviously there are some of the tales that like the headless kind of motif, like I mentioned before. that is something that's like pretty ingrained in like classic ghost stories, But like, this weird like crying thing saying, oh Lordy, and then it's just a sheet spread out coming out of the water and then rising up into the air. That is like maximum high strangeness because it doesn't sound like anything you've ever heard of.
Right.
Or like a naked baby sitting on a chimney or a baby angel coming out of the ground at the edge of your garden.
Man.
Like they're all things that are just so like...
Here's another thing to think about you, Tyler, but also listener. Some of these things, again, aren't necessarily, like we're not talking about monstrous figures that are chasing after these people, apart from, whatever that thing was hanging in the tree with that kid.
Yeah.
We're not talking about scenarios yet or at all of where people were almost attacked or someone was grabbed and they felt these hairy hands grab them into that kind of thing. That's not what this is in this time. But if you can imagine that these good things exist.
Right.
The little babies in the garden and stuff, which that would be so cool if
It'd
there was
be
like little
amazing.
fairies and stuff.
Yeah.
Then it's not out of the realm of possibility, just like, even on like a biblical level too. There's evil and there's good. There's good things and bad things. If we're talking about these like unique sort of creatures of old, we'll call them, it's not too far out of the realm of possibility. There's some like terribly menacing things that exist out there as well. And I don't know, like the existence, that's what for me ramps up that fear is like, if these nice little things exist, then I'm already scared because that means there's probably something bad out there too.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and the
like,
fact too, man, like you said something that I forgot to I didn't want to interrupt you when you said it. You said like, okay, these people live here, their neighbors are far away, and yada, yada, yada. Another thing to think about is the fact that all of these stories have existed within these small families for a while now.
Like oral tradition type
stuff. But there's a pretty high chance that their neighbors haven't even heard the story that they're telling.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. And so then, like, these people aren't doing this to be famous.
No.
They're not trying to get a bunch of clicks or likes. They're not trying to do any of that, dude. They're probably super reluctant. I mean, gosh, we can see that in the way that they tell these stories, that they're super reluctant to even divulge this information, and they're experiencing something.
Yeah.
Now, whether one or two of them or a lot of them saw a meteor shower and didn't know what it was, or a mirage over the lake, or swamp gas, or whatever it is, sure, that's a possibility as equal to me as a possibility of something crazy out there.
Yeah.
But I don't know how you explain away other than just like the person is schizophrenic, a baby on a chimney.
Or a Bigfoot getting in the car with you.
Just hanging out.
Riding 3 miles.
Hey, man, do I need a buckle or you good?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, this next
one... You want
one...
me to crank the Model T or you've already got it running? Okay.
Yeah. This next one is similar to some of the stuff that I've talked about seeing and similar to the last one. This is from Calvin Talley. This is back when I was a young boy. I guess I was about 10-year-old. I was headed to church one evening, and I rode down the highway with my brother. And we got out, and I started walking up toward the church. And all of a sudden, there was something that came around from the side of this old building, and it was kindly dressed in white. And I couldn't hardly make it out. I'd always heard that this old building had ghosts, and I couldn't really understand what it was, but it made me pick up speed, that's for sure. So again, it's like, was he seeing the same thing that I saw? Some weird white thing. There's
also this element too, and I'm going to admit it here. Our minds can play a lot of tricks. And this is something that happened to me this week, actually. So I was walking early in the morning. It was pitch dark. And so I've got my headlamp. And at certain times of the morning, 1 or 2 cars in my neighborhood will be, heading off to either the gym or maybe they're heading to work because they commute far. I'm not sure. But I get out of the way and I'm, walking through the grass and then I'm back on the road. Well, I have to do a couple loops in my neighborhood, and I was on my run loop, and I'm running, and I look down and I see these footsteps, these wet footsteps on the side of the road, and I pass them, and in my mind, I was like, dude, did I just see like barefoot footprints like on the road.
Yeah.
Who the heck is walking around barefoot? And then I'm like, oh man, I'm going to take a picture of this. If it's like, is it a baby Bigfoot?
Yeah.
What's going on here? I go back. Now, keep in mind, the only reason I'm turning around is because, I saw the toes, everything as I passed. I go back, I shine my light on it, and it's in the perfect shape of my shoe. It's where I had gotten off of the road and gotten back on earlier. But my mind literally saw feet.
Oh, yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And so it's like your mind has the capability of doing that. So, sometimes we can imagine, oh man, something's running after me. It's really just like the dirt kicking up behind you. That's happened to me too before. Again, not to take away anything from these folks, but in the same vein, dude, your mind's not going to play that kind of trick on you if it's like you said, what is it? Oh yeah, Bigfoot getting in your car.
Yeah, for sure. And this next little bit from Miss R.L. Elliott.
Hated it. So pissed that I added that in there.
No, I'm not pissed at all. No, but this one is actually, you're talking before about these sort of being like subtle or kind of seeing something. This one actually gets closer to the realm of like scary. So she says, my uncle, he lived in a house over yonder. And after his mother died, one night, him and his brother was in the bed. And something woke him up, choking him. And he said he tried every way to get his brother awake and couldn't get him awake. And he lit the lamp. And he said when he lit the lamp, it looked like a big animal that had black hair. And it was a big old animal. And he said it made another dive at his throat, to choke him again. He never did get his brother awake, but he followed this thing in the front room. And he said then that thing went up just like a ball of fire through the top of the house. You see, that was a spirit. That wasn't nobody. It went up through the top of the house right there in the room where his mother died. They'd seen a lot of things, and I believe in ghosts. Now up here, right above Rob Williams, there's a house there where an old man poisoned his wife. There's always things to see there. My mother saw a man with no head there. We used to go up there and play. They had a downstairs and an upstairs in it, and we, a bunch of us children, was upstairs playing. And there's a baby cried downstairs. Cried just like a real baby. So we tore the top out and come out of the top of that house. That's crazy too.
Live in a freaking teepee? What do you mean they tore the top out?
That's probably just like a dialect.
Like a saying?
Yeah, colloquial.
Like we got the heck out of Dodge?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm just imagining they live in a cardboard box and we just like popped it out. Yeah, wow, man.
Then she goes on to talk about Miss Maggie's house and how stuff would move in the cupboards and how, bees were never out in the wintertime, but you would hear bumblebees in the wintertime inside of her house.
Oh, dude, that's crazy, man. That reminds me of like the buzzing sounds that people would hear that we've talked about here recently, man.
I know. Okay. I like that. I like the previous one, though, where he's talking. It kind of sounds almost like a werewolf or something, like choking him out.
Man.
Yeah.
Man, all these stories really kind of just remind me of just how rich everyone's local area is with folklore. You just don't have the opportunity or take the opportunity to kind of dive into it. We're lucky in that years and years ago, this English teacher and his kids, like I said before, had this wherewithal to get out in there and document this stuff. And I think, I can just imagine it being like a coffee meeting, a couple of these students just being like, man, my grandma's got some crazy stories. Hey, wait a second, man. My grandma's got some crazy stories. And everybody just kind of saying, you know what, we need to write this stuff down. These are traditions. And by the way, just like Tyler said, these books aren't only this. This is like a single chapter of multi-volume books.
Oh, yeah.
There's so many other sort of gems of Southern tradition that is super interesting.
Real quick, this book, the subheader is Foxfire 2, Ghost Stories, Spring Wild, Plant Foods, Spinning and Weaving, Midwifing, Burial Customs, Corn Shuckings, Wagon Making, and More Affairs of Plain Living. That's amazing.
Man, super cool.
Yeah.
And you mentioned this earlier, but let's not all forget the Bell Witch haunting, which you can hear more about that here.
Hear more about this on That Would Be Rad, Season 2, Episode 53, The Bell Witch Halloween Special.
Happened in Tennessee.
Yep.
Not too far from here. And it's kind of, there's elements of this that kind of remind me of that, you know? And I think we might have even mentioned Haints and stuff back then.
Yeah.
What I love to do as we're kind of wrapping up today's episode is kind of talk about, look, we talked about some of these things being scary. We talked about the fact that there are scary stories of these things like the Bell Witch being more interactive with people, more nefarious in a lot of ways, things that will affect you if you're confronted with one of these things. I always loved it too, and it helps me sort of not get scared of my own tie.
Right.
To know, well, if something like that were to happen, what are the traditional solutions that these people have discovered over time that we can use to sort of counteract some of these things? And good news, we've got them. First off, of course, you got to use the blue paint. You got to go to the store. Go to your Ace Hardware today or your Home Depot and say, excuse me, sir, or madam, where can I get a gallon of your Haint blue?
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean? But also, I think I mentioned this earlier, one of the things that kind of scares them away is what we call down here a bottle tree. Now, the bottle tree actually originated in Africa and migrated here to the U.S., and the bottles are said to catch wandering spirits at night and hold them until they can be destroyed by the sunshine of daytime. There's a lot of different ways that you'll see this. Sometimes I've seen bottle trees where you're just looking at a tree and there's little, bottles hanging by a string. Other times I've seen it where these blue bottles will be like sort of placed on the branches of the tree. So it's just this whole tree that has a bunch of blue bottles on it. And so that's pretty cool. The spirits and stuff are destroyed by the sunshine once daylight comes. So, if you got a couple bottles out there, you and your friends can just, have a couple beers, put the bottles on a tree, safe. All right. Yeah. You can also distract Haints with counting tricks, apparently. Not a big fan of math. According to the legend,
same.
Haints and Tyler can't resist certain repetitive tasks, such as reading newspapers pasted on the walls, or counting the straws in a broom, or grains of rice. The idea is to distract and frustrate the Haint, who keep losing count and starting over again repeatedly. The Haints will be forced to leave as morning approaches, having done no harm. Pretty interesting. Now, this one is the best for last because I can guarantee you, I don't know how she did it, but my mom was able to infiltrate this folklore, get this on this website that I found this, and this is the ultimate way to get rid of Haints. You ready?
Yeah.
Clean the house.
Oh, there it is.
A lot of times, in all seriousness, people will mean burn sage or incense, but also, again, thank you, Mom, mop the floors with pine, camphor, place salt across the doors and windows and in corners. That's, super famous one. If you've watched that show, Supernatural, you would know that. But also just, it is an oldie but a goodie. You can make a barrier of salt, and apparently spirits can't cross that. So
yeah, real quick, that's interesting because and that goes back to some of the stuff when I talked before about like conjuring and a lot of that, kind of Appalachian magical kind of stuff. But even my family's devout pretty heavily, big time like Baptist, like Southern Baptist. That's how I grew up. But my grandfather's grandmother, he said she would have salt under all of her windowsills. And so to me, there's something that's like so fascinating. I mean, same with like the Pennsylvania Dutch and a lot of those almost like little rituals, almost in a way of like protecting themselves. But if it was viewed, through like the modern lens, it's like, oh, that's like witchcraft or that's like,
right.
But it wasn't like that. I mean, same with like the conjuring stuff with my great aunt and my uncle, Stuart now. I mean, it's like it's a thing that they just sort of pass down orally. But if it's viewed outside of like the way it was intended, you could easily say like, oh, well, they're into witchcraft. And so I find that really interesting.
Big time, man. All these old traditions that, like we said earlier, have kind of just, I don't know, died off.
Yeah.
You know? And so it's such a cool thing to be able to peek back into this time period, to hear these stories of people that, again, live in these remote areas.
Yeah.
Used a different word there. And to add this horror aspect to all these stories is just, in my opinion, one of the best ways that we could have opened up this season.
That's right.
Into the spookiness. And I cannot wait for the rest of this month because, boy, we're going to bring it.
Yeah, we are. It kind of, me personally, maybe selfishly, it kind of takes me home. I mean, reading this for Woody was very difficult, but for me,
except for that first one, I did good on that one.
You did pretty good on the first one. For me, it kind of felt like I was just imitating my grandfather who passed away a few years ago. But yeah, I'm so glad that we got to kind of take it home for our first big, splash into the October Spooktacular. If you would like to tell us your own ghost story or your own sort of rural, said that one pretty good. Your own rural, ghost story or urban legend, hit us up over on Instagram. If you would like to tell us like a longer story, shoot us a DM or head on over to thatwouldberadpod@gmail.com. Or you can leave an essay if you want. Even better, and with the possibility of maybe making it in a future episode, you can leave basically a voice memo over on our website, which is thatwouldberadpodcast.com. And yeah, you may become, officially part of That Would Be Rad history with, cool sound design and all that kind of stuff. If you really want to help the show, the best possible way is, there's some merch. You can buy us a coffee, but the best way is over on our Patreon, the Rabbit Trail. It's more of what you love. It's a little looser, but it's just a great way of really showing your support in real time and, helping the show stay on the tracks. I guess that's about it. Woody, you got anything else?
Man, I think that's it.
Right on. Well, we love you. We appreciate you. Stay spooky. And as always,
be rad.
That's the way it goes.
Time where I just needed some sunshine. You were already dead before you became a ghost. You always said our future would be a parade of flowers, but now all that's left is a single rose. That's the way it goes.
Access granted.
Boom.
Dude, the way you said stay spooky had the tooth whistle, man, and it's just the greatest.
I thought I did good on the stay spooky.
You're like, and
I did not.
And just
and
stay spooky.
Stay spooky.
Oh yeah.
Shh.